This video provides arguments and an introduction to proofs for the existence of a global advanced civilization and a kind of economic network that at least in part is clearly recognized, including by science. This global advanced civilization and economic network is, at least by some, misinterpreted as being the result of at least one supposed transcontinental meteorite impact event. We start out with a map of some so-called cyclopean works roughly in West-Eurasia. This map, as well as other maps with eventually associated information, like the map with the classic Neanderthal-Sites, shows that these works and maps are exposed to the Atlantic Ocean, its rivers, and the Americas, this so directly or indirectly. In other words, what is connected to the Mediterranean is consequently exposed to the Atlantic Ocean and the Americas, this by means of several circulations that individually displace more water than all the rivers of the world combined. Roughly, we see cyclopean works in the next locations: the Guadalquivir River close to Gibraltar, the Rhone River close to Marseilles or rather Liguria, the boot of Italy down from Rome in Lazio, to the foot of Italy, Sicily that is located south of Italy, the east coast of the Adriatic Sea, Turkey, Canaan, and all the way east, this as far as Georgia, but also the Douro River in the north of Portugal, and several western Mediterranean islands, that all are obviously exposed to Gibraltar, as well as to the Atlantic Ocean, and indirectly, this by means of circulations, to the Americas. Canaan calls attention, because it behaves more like a stepstone for the migrations and events rolling out from the Atlantic Ocean, this in the direction of the east of the Mediterranean and beyond, than that it behaves as a stepstone for migrations and events rolling out from Africa to the rest of the world. Also, Canaan would be the obvious place for the also by consensus supposed and improbable interbreeding between Africans and Neanderthals. This so since the Canaan Neanderthals are the closest to Africa and in fact quite isolated from other Neanderthal groups. Yet no such interbreeding took place in or close to Canaan, nor any other location in the world was evidenced to have been the place of the by consensus assumed interbreeding. At the same time, these and other maps show that the locations in focus are not associated, or are at best weakly associated with the obviously present land connection or bridge between Africa and Asia. Obviously, the weak association with Africa, the lack of interbreeding with the isolated Canaan Neanderthals, etc., are clear challenges for human history, as it is assumed by consensus, which imposes that the origin of all humans lies in Africa. Since the Mediterranean is and always was well connected to the Atlantic Ocean, all regions with cyclopean works also are positively associated with rivers directly or indirectly exposed to the Atlantic Ocean and its circulations. At the same time, and by means of the Atlantic circulations, all these locations are exposed to the Americas. As said, most of the locations in focus, including the early modern human sites and boundaries of 47,000 years ago, as well as the Neanderthal sites, are quite negatively associated with Africa, or at least with a land bridge between Africa and the rest of the world. Despite all this and yet other clear evidence, consensus still assumes that the early hominins and the early modern humans expanded out of Africa. According to our arguments, all these places in focus of this video clearly are dominantly associated with Gibraltar, and almost all events could have been through Gibraltar, as well as through the currents of the Atlantic Ocean circulation. In this case, the Mediterranean Sea would have been a mere extension of the Atlantic Ocean and its circulations and currents. So anyhow, these are the cyclopean works. There are some differences between cyclopean works and polygonal works, which are not important in the context of this video. The cyclopean works, nor the polygonal works, are spatially continuous, probably because quite a lot of them were recycled in later times or by later cultures. The onset of at least some of the works could have been as early as 47,000 years ago, or even before. So the cyclopean works are not necessarily right from 47,000 years ago, but we are quite convinced that the cyclopean works builders are the same culture, or an extension of the early modern humans culture or cultures from around 47,000 years ago, or from even before them, like for instance also of early original modern humans, as well as also of the clearly spatially associated Neanderthals. Early original modern humans is a concept of the authors of this channel, and this concept is the subject of other of our videos. For now it is sufficient to be aware that with early original modern humans we mean the common ancestor of all the here discussed groups, and that also includes Neanderthals, as well as the actually living 8 billion modern humans. We, the authors of this channel, claim that the early original modern humans are the still not or significantly less methylated and hybridized ancestor of all the here discussed groups. We claim that these early original modern humans are the ancestors on top of the whole genome haplotype tree, and consequently also the ancestors of the first-line haplotype B006, as well as the to this haplotype associated Neanderthals. The main message from this very important, but not sufficiently appreciated, whole genome haplotype tree is that the origin of all humans as well as all now extinct hominins lies in the Americas, and not in Africa. All other Maya and recognized haplotypes are later than B006. We expect that these early original modern humans still possessed the fat-digesting gene and the blood group O or blood allele O, and still lacked certain mutations or rather hybridizations like for instance the very early PV92 as well as the quite late M269 mutation. We claim, and there is plenty of scientific evidence, that all of them descend from the Americas, something that also is systematically proven by the most appropriate markers, including by the ancestral markers and the whole genome haplotype tree. Besides this evidence, there seems to be nothing or no recognized earlier culture than the early modern humans of 47,000 years ago that spatially associates with the cyclopean or polygonal works. For the above reasons, we conclude that the cyclopean-works builders are an extension in time of the early modern humans culture from around 47,000 years ago, and that also seems to be the case of the polygonal works, as well as the acropolis-like structures. These early modern humans of 47,000 years ago have been found to belong to Y-DNA haplogroups such as C1a, C1b, and K2a, while some later populations that expanded with these early modern humans of 47,000 years ago are linked to haplogroup R1b. The cradle of haplogroup C as well as the cradle of haplogroup R1b lie in the Americas, which is a clear indication that also the origin of these early modern humans lies in the Americas. It is quite obvious that the origins of Neanderthals and early modern humans, including of haplogroup C and R, lies in the Americas, which still is denied by consensus, possibly because not denying it would prove all consensus hypotheses, which includes African origin, wrong. As long as consensus does not admit these origins lying in the Americas, scientists will hesitate to go any further than claiming, or is it admitting, that human history has become complex or improbable and needs to be rewritten from scratch. The acropolis-like structures seem to occur a bit more to the east, and in our opinion later. Resuming, we see all this as an indication that, in general, the acropolis-like structures come later in time. Yet again, this would be a further indication they came from west of Gibraltar and advanced from the west to the east along the Mediterranean. This is a map with the classical Neanderthal sites. You clearly can see that the early modern human culture of 47,000 years ago and the cyclopean works are spatially and partially temporarily very well associated with Neanderthals. I won't go into detail. Here are the Neanderthal sites and so-called industries. So there is a combination of influence from the Americas through the oceanic circulation to the rest of the world, this to the west and to the east, from where the Americas could have been seen as Mu from west of the Americas and as Atlantis from east of the Americas. This is the oceanic circulation to the east, and it of course arrives on Gibraltar and on the Atlantic facades of Europe and Eurasia. They make use of rivers like the Rhine and the Danube, and also the Yangtze River, amongst others. With extensions of rivers in India and Pakistan, the Yangtze River gets as far as the Aral Sea, so when taking the extensions into account, the inland extensions of the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean circulations are touching, in the case of the Neanderthals and Denisovans, at the height of the Altai Mountains. This is a map that quite some will recognize, but do not relate to the Atlantic and Pacific circulations as the main motors of human history and expansions, that involve mining and metallurgy, which on their turn will produce substantial but localized amounts of slacks, that easily can be and effectively are mistaken for meteorite impact proxies. The fact that these supposed meteorite proxies are not continuous, and much more so the fact that these proxies are extremely associated with human sites, expansions, and certain activities, makes it clear that these proxies are not the consequence of the by some supposed meteorite impact or impacts, but instead of the proven human presence, expansions, and activities. All this is introduced in this video, but is substantially more in focus of other videos of this series and of this channel. So another place where they touch are the Altai Mountains, where you have the Denisovan Cave, where the Neanderthals and the Denisovans came together, and or departed from. So they come together from the two main ocean circulation and routes. According to consensus, it were the now extinct hominins, which include the Neanderthals, that arrived earlier. According to Origin for Existence, the humans arrived together, or even before the Neanderthals. The fact that we don't find or recognize evidence of the early modern humans before the Neanderthals does not prove they were not present. Possibly we don't find these very early modern humans, because there was a lot of cremation going on amongst the humans, and it's of course long ago, and the preservation of human bones was not so good as that of the Neanderthals, which in fact often died in mines, probably by means of accidents and or by means of being disposed of, and whose bones were immediately mineralized, and this without decay, because of the lack of microbiological activity in these resource layers that they were buried in. So the now extinct hominins, which include the Neanderthals, were fossilized right away and without decay, this contrary to the humans. Even in those cases these humans had not been cremated. It is in the Altai Mountains, with the Denisovan Cave, where the Neanderthals and the Denisovans provingly came together, and or departed from. We claim that they came together from the two main ocean circulation and paths, after they had departed from the Americas, this by means of the ocean circulations, this to the east through the Atlantic Ocean, as well as to the west through the Pacific Ocean. According to consensus, it were the now extinct hominins, which include the Neanderthals, that arrived before any humans. According to us of Origin for Existence, the humans arrived together, or even long before the Neanderthals. Also of this there is plenty of evidence of. Among much other evidence, how else could the American Y-DNA haplogroup Q have spread to all continents, if it would not have done so before the by consensus imposed human interbreeding and human expansion date of roughly 47,000 years ago? Even if consensus would claim the American Y-DNA haplogroup Q did spread to all continents after the by consensus imposed interbreeding with Neanderthals or after 47,000 years ago, then humans would not all be of sub-Saharan Africa origin, because sub-Saharan Africa never presented the American Y-DNA haplogroup Q. It is worth mentioning that the subclade of the American Y-DNA haplogroup Q that provingly spread to all continents always carried the so-called Neanderthal fraction or Neanderthal DNA, as well as the Denisovan fraction or Denisovan DNA and other so-called ghost fraction or ghost DNA, as all these were and still are carried variably amongst all modern humans. What consensus tries to defend at all cost with its hypotheses is only a part of the variability amongst even only the actually living so-called modern humans. This with the only exception from the standpoint of expansions of rather insignificant and rather local groups, only living in rather not habitable places in sub-Saharan Africa. Since the by consensus imposed interbreeding is proven to be improbable, the so-called Neanderthal fraction or Neanderthal DNA carried by the American Y-DNA haplogroup Q and all its descendants turns out to be a further confirmation of the fact that the Neanderthal fraction or Neanderthal DNA was provided by the American Y-DNA haplogroup Q, and that all modern humans are of American origin, just as all appropriate scientific markers, as well as all archaeological evidences and expansions, which are in focus of this video, are proving all along. Consensus does not even attempt to justify why the supposedly relatively young American Y-DNA haplogroup Q spread across all continents, supposedly departing from the Beringia land bridge. Consensus does not even attempt to justify why the supposedly first Y-DNA haplogroup that against all science, supposedly originated in Africa, represents very insignificant numbers of living individuals of this supposed Adam or first haplogroups, and worse, why this supposed ancestor of all humans was significantly admixed with non-sub-Saharan Africa DNA. And even worse, why it is not found, and not even in fossils, outside of Africa. The fact that we don't find or recognize evidence of the early modern humans before the Neanderthals does not prove they were not present. Possibly we don't find these very early modern humans, because there was a lot of cremation going on amongst the humans, and it's of course long ago, and the preservation of human bones was not so good as that of the Neanderthals, which in fact often died in mines, probably by means of accidents and or by means of them deliberately being disposed of, and whose bones were immediately mineralized. And this without decay, because of the lack of microbiological activity in these resource layers, in which they had been buried in. So the now extinct hominins, which include the Neanderthals, were fossilized right away and without decay. Next to them also their stone tools were found. Humans did not use stone tools, and in eventual cases that humans had used stone tools, such humans are not recognized as humans by consensus. We claim that consensus, while clearly proven to be extremely improbable, only still sustains, because the general public is addicted to its extremely improbable and unrealistic long-term narratives, that unfolded or deliberately were promoted since consensus took hold more firmly, this soon after Darwinism. this clearly not being a spontaneous initiative of Darwin himself. Nevertheless, nobody seems to care about the latter, but rather about defending their favorite narratives at all cost.